Hi, and welcome to another Painting D1Z for absolute beginners. This episode we're going to focus on a little bit more of an advanced technique and look at some camo. As you can see here, I have a Strelok from our MRB range. He's on a 25mm scenic base as usual, and I'm using my trusty Citadel holder. Now the Strelok has been base coated or primed using Vallejo grey primer. This is going to give us a really light base to work off, but you can use black if you want. The way this video will work really just depends on the colors you want to use. As you'll see when I start painting, I'm going to go with an alpine camouflage pattern, but you can really use this technique for any camouflage you want to paint. Because I'm using alpine, the first thing I'm doing is giving a white overbrush to the miniature. Now overbrushing is a lot like dry brushing, which I've talked about in previous videos, except you have a bit more paint on your brush, so a bit more comes off. The next thing I'm going to do is then just block in all the colors on the miniature. I'm going to go fairly quickly through this. If you want more detail on how to achieve this effect, feel free to go back and look at the Spetsnaz video I've done previously. But all we're really doing here is just blocking in the major colors using thin down paint, the tip of our brush, and just taking our time to make sure there's not too much of a mess. But the beauty part about this is if we do slip and make a bit of a splash here and there, we're going to be painting camouflage over the white areas later, so you can fix them up, and there's going to be a chance to go over with the white at the end and just tidy up any areas. So don't get too caught up about it, but do take your time, use your thin paint and the tip of your brush, and you're going to find that this is all going to take you only a matter of minutes to get done. You'll notice too that here I'm using the green-grey Vallejo paint that I used when I painted the Spetsnaz in the first video. The idea behind this is by using sort of similar color between the miniatures, we can keep a consistent palette, and even though they're going to be painted differently, they're going to look like they're part of the same force. That's the reason here I'm using the German camo pale brown for the boots. It's the same color I did for the Spetsnaz, and again, it just ties the models together. Just make sure you're taking your time, you're covering all the areas, not leaving any of that white primer coming through, or grey primer coming through, and then you'll find that when we give this a wash later on, it's just going to pop out really nicely with all the texture. So the boots and the gloves, as I said, are the German camo pale brown, and it's all about just taking our time, cutting it in. Now for the balaclava, I'm using London grey. Again, this is a color I've used previously, and if you don't want to spend a fortune on paints, then you can obviously reuse them. If you want to go lighter or darker, you can mix in some white or some black in order to create some shades, but I'm happy with this straight out of the pot. The other thing I'm going to do with this is make sure I get all around, including underneath the crook of the helmet there. The bases are also going to be London grey, so keeps that consistent across all of the forces I painted. Taking our time, cutting in, but not getting too stressed about it. We're going to give this a wash later on, as we have in the previous videos, and this is all just going to give us a really nice base coat for when we start our camouflage. Next to last, we're going to block in the gun with black, and we'll do the goggles on his helmet in black as well. So you might wonder why you've got green vests and black guns with white camouflage a base. Then the real reason around this is contrast. What I find is when you're painting camouflage miniatures, if the whole model is the same color, it all just turns into a big sort of uneven blob, which is probably what you want in reality. But when you're painting miniatures, you really just want that to stand out. So the last little step here is we're going to just paint in the face holes here on the balaclava. Don't know what else you'd call them, and using that Cadian flesh tone, which we've used previously. As I said, we're going to give the model a wash. The browns and greys are going to get Agrax Earthshade. The green areas are getting Athonian Camo Shade. Now you guys have already seen me do this in previous videos. I don't need to make you watch me do it for the whole thing. So just know that if you want to know the technique for using the washes, go back and have a look at the first video in the series. And that's it. We'll let this dry, and then we're ready to start our camouflage pattern once we tidy up a few little bits. Okay, to do the pattern, I'm using a 000 sized paintbrush. It's got a nice, fine, narrow point to it, but you can use whatever brush you have. You don't need to go out and buy a tiny little brush. Just thin your paint and use the very tip. Now, the first thing I'm doing is using a mid-tone of London grey over the white fatigues. And as you can see, I'm using just little short dashes, maybe only 2-3 mil long at the most, just to put some uneven sort of splinters all over the white areas on the fatigues. Now, as I said, you can use this for any camo you want. If you wanted to do a desert one, you could use a light brown base and then a grey mid-tone and then a dark brown over the top of that. If you were doing urban, you could do a grey base with light blue and dark blue lines over the top of that. The idea is we really just want to create lots of contrast here. So this is one of the reasons that I've chosen urban for this. I probably wouldn't, if this was, for my own personal use, go with an alpine pattern like this, but I thought it would really pop for the video. So this is what we want. Just those little squiggly lines, 2 to 3 mil long, all over the fatigues area on the model. There's no right or wrong way to do this, just keep it short and neat. Now we go with our dark tone, and so this is just black. The Vallejo black primer. It works just as well as any other paint, so we're just putting this on. And the idea is we want to make little intersecting lines over the top of the mid-tone lines. So wherever there's a little grey line, we want somewhere along that line a black line crossing it. It goes a little bit out of focus there, but I'll pull it up in a second. And you can see we're really just making sure that wherever there's that mid-tone line, there's a dark tone line crossing it. The idea behind this is that there's still plenty of white space around the miniature. And this is what I meant about making sure you've got, contrasted areas there. If we put lots of these things in, suddenly the miniature would go from a white uniform with, black and grey camouflage pattern on it to being just a black and grey mess with little white splotches in it. So you need to make sure there's plenty of white space to contrast. Now again, this is the same if you're doing desert, you need plenty of that light brown, or jungle, plenty of that green in there before the darker tones go over the top. Once we put our dark tone in, it's really just a matter of taking that mid-tone again and filling in the areas where there's lots of white space. And just a little dot here or there, you can make all the difference. You want to make sure there's probably only, 4 or 5 mils between any particular spot at the most. Maybe even 2 to 3 if you're wanting a more comprehensive pattern. So as you can see, I'm just going around, and wherever there's a bit of white space, we're just putting another little dash of the mid-tone. Now you could go over and do more intersecting black lines, but I think what that does is starts to darken the camouflage pattern. So you really just want to go easy on it. Finally, I'm just going around and cleaning up all the areas where some washes got on, or I've gone a bit heavy with the camo or the black line there, as you can see. And this is just the final step. Now putting some more white over the top of the camouflage really helps those white areas pop out and breaks up the more darker, clunkier areas that we may have had a bit of mishap with or gone a bit thick in the camouflage. And that's really it. So really just making sure that we are breaking it up and putting a few of those brighter white sort of patches in as well. Now, as I said, you can do this for any type of camouflage. As long as you've got a light base and then a darker mid-tone and a darkest dark tone, you can go pretty much any sort of color combinations you want. Finally, the last little bit I'm doing here is giving the guns and boots and the goggles just a very light dry brush with Terminator Stone. Again, just to pick out the details and really make them pop a little bit. And there you go. The last little touch. The green tuft, like on all the bases, to tie them all together. And we're done. So with a pretty minimal fuss, we have some alpine camouflage. But using this technique, you can pretty much paint whatever camouflage pattern you wanted. If we compare it to the source shot I've got here, you can see that you're getting the feel. And that's the whole deal about painting with this technique, is you want it to feel like the pattern. You're not really trying to replicate it. At this scale, it gets a bit tricky. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts below, and look forward to our next video.